right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today as we discuss how PR can better measure up to marketing in the eyes of the C-suite. Now more than ever, there's a need for an increased collaboration between marketing and communications to create and sustain continuity in that brand messaging and the overall customer experience. However, PR is still struggling with uncertainty around measuring its actual value and integrating those measurements with marketing and business success metrics. Today, we're going to share how to think about performance and metrics in ways that are more comparable to marketing, ways for PR pros to work more closely with marketing and actually achieve better results together, and best practices for PR to measure and report up into the C suite. I'd like to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing this with all registrants as well. First of all, I am truly delighted to introduce our guest speaker. If you would please welcome Amy Aylward, Senior Director from External Communications at Extreme Networks. Extremes is a leader in cloud networking, delivering services and solutions that connect devices, applications, and people in new ways to drive better outcomes. With over 50,000 customers globally, they trust Extreme's end-to-end cloud-driven networking solutions and rely on their top-rated services and the support that they receive to accelerate their own digital transformation efforts and deliver progress like never before. As a leader of the external communications team, Amy is responsible for Extreme's public relations and social media strategy. She's a seasoned marketing and communications professional with experience in all things high tech, as well as design, media, and creative industries. Amy previously held leadership roles at several PR agencies at Vericode, Monotype, and Avid. I'm Roxanne Papagiannopoulos, Strategic Account Director, North America at Inclusive. My 20 years of experience in PR, the industry itself, spans all sides of the customer experience, including founding my own media analysis business as a global business manager of product development at NASDAQ, and most recently heading up the PR glue business in the US prior to the merger and creation of the new Inclusive. For those of you who don't yet know Inclusive, we combine industry-leading data science from our Silicon Valley engineering team with an international consultancy and award-winning media relations tools to help you manage, monitor, and measure your communications activity. And we are the inventors of performance standards like Power of Voice and PR attribution, which is the first technology to connect PR efforts to actual revenue. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start by addressing if and how PR fits into marketing, given that there's a strong need for these two disciplines to be integrated. Then we're going to focus on aligning marketing and PR with business goals, not just to have a full picture of where your brand is going, but also to help you create strategies and implement tactics that contribute to those goals. We'll also spend some time discussing strategies for PR and marketing to collaborate in service of driving greater impact together. Finally, we're going to share best practices around demonstrating the value of PR to the C-suite, in other words, measuring up to marketing. Throughout the webinar, we're going to hear Amy's perspective on how to better bring communications and marketing together, and how her team has been using existing marketing systems, frameworks, and expertise, as well as modern PR measurement to provide similar attribution for customer behavior and revenue contribution. Finally, we're going to end with a Q&A. So I ask that you would please submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we're going to address as many of those as possible at the end. With the recent rise in the importance of PR as the key driver of corporate reputation, there's been an ongoing debate about where it should sit within any organization. CMOs and other marketing leaders believe that at least part of the PR function should live within marketing. And in many cases, CMOs have already claimed PR. While some marketing executives still see the PR function itself as an imprecise practice that's actually too difficult to measure, many PR professionals actually consider communications to be a broader management discipline, reporting directly to the CEO. And even when they do come together, poor alignment and working in silos are not surprising without a proper integration playbook. That said, this trend towards integrating communications and marketing has been in the works for over a decade, and we've seen great examples of increased effectiveness when the two disciplines are working together in synergy. At the end of the day, we're seeing, excuse me, we're seeing that in the age of social media and the empowered consumer, PR has actually emerged as a key element of the marketing mix. Amy, as a communications leader, what are your thoughts on this? How do you see marketing and PR in relation to each other and why?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here today, Roxanne. I've been in PR marketing for more than 20 years now, and PR in many cases has always been an afterthought when it comes to having a seat at the table, when it comes to strategic value and things like contribution to pipeline. In my time, it's always sat in marketing in my various roles, whether that's been on the agency side or on the in-house side. But I would say there's been sort of a complete mix of interest and interaction with the executive team on PR. It depends on where you are and how invested they are. And I don't think it's because people didn't think it was relevant or impactful. I think it's because we had no way to really prove or get people to understand the value of PR in a tangible way. So like, unless a sales rep asked somebody how they heard about the company, or it came up very specifically, like, oh, I saw this story in eWeek and I came and checked out your products. There was no real tangible way to measure that impact. Sort of like, I think of the ad industry. Like if you see a billboard for a car, you're driving down the street and you go buy that car. Like, how do you ever really know that that was the medium that drove you to make the purchase? So I'd say that in my experience, organizations that have executive teams that invest both financially and personally in PR way outperform those that don't. And I'm not just saying this because I work at Extreme now, but Extreme really does value PR at the executive level and makes it work. And they've really made it a point to rally the whole company around PR in terms of the efforts and some of the outcomes that we're driving. And I'll say, and many of you on this call have probably experienced it, the role of a CMO and the skill set of a CMO have changed quite a bit. Most companies are leaning into data-centric CMOs versus creatives. I'd say for the first half of my career, that was kind of the other way around. The CMO was always sort of the creative guy or woman that came to the table. And now, the data centricity, which didn't have a huge place in marketing, maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, is one of the most important things. So I think the perfect balance now is someone that can drive both that right brain and left brain approach and that level of thinking. And in my opinion, things like PR, social, product, executive thought leadership are all tied together. And things like output and ROI is far better when you don't work in silos. It may seem obvious, but I've seen companies not be able to get out of their own way when it comes to PR. They just see it as a channel to issue a press release and then move on. It's like, oh, we've got the press release out, like next thing. And really, and I think we'll cover some of this today and sort of the collaboration piece, but it really should be a group effort. And it really should be about, creating a narrative and this sort of ongoing storytelling to the market. So I'm excited to explore some of these things further today, but that's sort of just my opening bit here of just sort of what my experience has been and how things have changed over the last several years.
I love that balance between the left brain and the right brain. I totally agree with you. So we actually want to hear from you right now. We're going to pop up a poll. And we ask that you answer, it's literally one question and it's multiple choice. And later in the webinar, we're going to share that with everyone. So here's the question. How do you currently collaborate with your marketing colleagues? So take a moment to answer the poll, and it's going to pop up right here in Zoom. There are 4 options. You'll be able to go ahead and choose those. And I'm going to continue on so we can talk about some more things. All right, so go ahead and answer that as you go through, and I thank you for your participation in advance. So what's the secret to PR and marketing working together successfully? It actually turns out that the key is in understanding each other's value and setting aligned objectives and creating collaboration opportunities and plans for mutual success. That mutual success is the key to a lot of this, is the working together, mutual success, looking forward. So let's look at the value of PR through the eyes of a CMO, because this perspective can actually be helpful for communicators as they articulate the benefits of working together with their marketing colleagues. So, Amy, would you mind sharing your experience discussing what PR brings to the table with your CMO, Wes Duro?
Sure. I'm lucky that as a CMO, Wes is very invested in the role of PR and its impact across his organization, and he's made it a very visible part of his org structure. That doesn't always exist, especially if you're on the agency side. You probably feel like sometimes you're kind of an outlier. But when I joined Extreme, they had a good measurement system in place that was able to show some of the basics of volume and potential reach. Having had Inclusive and 2 companies previously, when I first met Wes, I immediately shared the value with him of how we could more accurately quantify the reach of PR. And first, I think he was blown away that there was a tool that could do that. But second, and this is no mark on Wes, but I don't think many CMOs have heard their PR lead talk about things like web traffic, hand raisers, conversions. And it immediately changed the conversation. I remember going into our first quarterly business review with the executive team and sharing the insights we could start collecting and how we were going to change the dialogue about the impact PR has on the marketing funnel. And I think this conversation and being able to sort of speak in this language really up-leveled both me and the PR function at the company. We all knew, metrics and measurement are crucial to marketing, but PR was always sort of left standing in the corner talking about things like hits and mentions and how much, things like I remember back in my early days to sort of justify PR, people were talking about, well, if we, did an advertisement here, this is how much it would have cost us for that much space. But there was never a real answer about the impact of what we do. And, now just having these insights and having Wes as a partner, we're able to sit next to demand generation and web and others and present a unified view of how we capture and follow leads and get visibility into what's driving those leads. And oftentimes PR is that first stop. So in that sense, getting a seat at the table has been a little bit easier because not only are we just sort of becoming cheerleaders for the great coverage that we're getting, but we're actually showing the impact that it has on the business.
You mentioned being cheerleaders, at sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah.
PR really is and has the opportunity to be front and center. And I think you articulated that really well and how you've managed to do that. So thank you very much for sharing that perspective. What I'd like to do now is take a look at the value of working closely with marketing through the communicators lens, because most importantly, marketers have already shifted from primarily being a cost center to a revenue generator. And they've actually had decades of data-driven strategy experience to share with communicators. So in this sense, I'd love to understand how you've used the marketing resource at Extreme to your advantage, and if you could expand on that for us.
Sure. Yeah, we've definitely established a close collaboration with marketing. And, every situation is different. Every organization is different. Some you have to kind of fight your way to the table. Others, it's welcome, and it really just varies. I think part of it is just building relationships early on internally to the company. But, I think I mentioned the quarterly business review that we have a few weeks after each quarter closes. And in that, we talk about some of the major PR announcements we've had, how we coordinated across the marketing team to launch these things and that overall impact. What really sort of is the central glue for us is we are a Google Analytics shop. So I think having that sync across the board is helpful. Web is looking at data from Google Analytics, digital, PR, demand gen. So we're starting from a common framework. We use Inclusive to look at traffic coming from media articles to our website, share of voice, power of voice, social syndication, and conversions, all of things I'll get into later. But those are all driven by Google Analytics. So first step in going and getting to the table is not only just the planning process of how we execute a campaign, but what the impact that is across the organization. And we're all starting from a common set of data, which really just helps us create a consistent benchmark. And we can sort of collectively look at what's converting and compare and contrast with each other. I can filter through organic and owned content and show the content team sort of what's resonating. And I know that they find that feedback valuable, and we have a conversation there. I can sit with our VP of revenue marketing and say, here are some of the trends we're seeing at the top of the funnel or from an engagement and an awareness perspective. How does that compare to what you're seeing? And we go in and we're very synced, when we go in to present this to the executive team, because we are looking at that common set of data and we're speaking the same language and tangible metrics. And that really has changed the game quite a bit.
Yeah, I find that really impressive, Amy, the collaboration that you continually demonstrate in all of your meetings and your workings with other parts of the team, especially as you bring that right up to the C-suite. Because we know marketers measure success across the entire customer life cycle, from awareness and consideration to action and loyalty, which includes that ultimate financial metric of the bottom line of ROI. So later in this webinar, we're going to dive into applying this methodology to our PR measurement. So to be successful, every organization must have a set of clear business goals and a way to measure the progress towards achieving those goals. They're called SMART goals. The C-suite typically sets key goals around acquiring or retaining customers, improving corporate or brand reputation, creating a new category, or gaining meaningful brand engagement. And those goals are often tied to revenue targets. It's essential for both marketing and PR to align with their company's business goals, not just to have a full picture of what the brand itself is doing, but also to be able to create strategies and implement the tactics that contribute to the success of those goals. And we know marketers have become experts at actually aligning their objectives to business goals. The way they do this is by outlining the full customer journey, which starts with awareness about the company's offerings and ultimately concludes with the repeat purchases that we would love to have, that initial and those repeat purchases, because we want people to buy from us over and over and over again, or like Amy, as they move from one company to the next, they find the value in what you're doing and they want to engage with you repeatedly. So another way to look at the customer journey is the marketing funnel. That's a visualization for understanding the process of turning prospects into customers through the attract, connect, engage, and ultimately converting them to that sale and keeping them as a customer. And with this framework, both marketing and communications can set their objectives for each step of the funnel or the customer journey. And while traditionally PR has been thought of, as being, and you mentioned this earlier, as the top of the funnel, or that attract, connect, and engage stages, with today's technology, we can actually measure the impact of the communication from all the way from the attract all the way through down to the convert. So using an objective setting and measurement framework, such as the one described above, actually will help communicators to create standards and consistent ways of measuring success over time, aligning with marketing strategies and their dashboards. As we mentioned also earlier, speaking the language of the C-suite when it actually comes to results, and ultimately demonstrating the value of PR and securing investment in PR. So Amy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, and there's a lot there. No, I love the concept of aligning objectives with the customer journey. And again, here's a term that, for many years in PR, we never talked about the customer journey, but I think this is where getting a seat at the table and having a discussion that's sort of all grounded in what we're trying to do. We're trying to make money for the company, or we're trying to raise awareness, whatever that goal may be. You kind of have to start from a common principle. So, you can't have a successful launch if you're not aligned with content, demand gen, product, marketing automation, digital. And it's crucial. And the best results come when your content strategy is bulletproof. So, for instance, you may be working on a product launch. In many cases, the press release or press coverage might be the first time a prospect is hearing about your company. You have to think about the journey they'll go through once they decide to learn more. So things like, what kind of content assets are available for the prospect once they come to our site? Are there case studies to prove value of the solution? Where do you put in the forum to request access to gated assets? How does your social strategy align? Is there enough high-level technical product information available? So, what we're doing as PR professionals is creating sort of that first look or that first view into something. But if you're not aligned across the board and kind of thinking through that whole funnel with the rest of your team, it's likely that all your, many of your efforts at that awareness stage are going to kind of fall by the wayside. You really do get one shot to make a first impression. And if you don't, it will show in the numbers. For instance, we know that we can drive, let's say, 500 people to our site from a great PR placement. But if there's a drop off in their journey after that, you've missed a crucial step somewhere. So we have to use that intel to help each other get better. Having that visibility through some of these metrics does help us get better. The numbers don't lie. Now, granted, I will always say that as a PR professional, metrics are important. Your instincts are, very important as well to help, understand sort of what's going to, start that process. But I think the most crucial thing that we're all learning now is just to be fluid. You'll get early indicators if things aren't working, and you'll have to be nimble and ready to change your approach. My team will tell you I'm a big fan of testing to learn and then being quick to adapt. So, you might have one approach that is working, and you want to double down there, or maybe the early indicator is that it's not working. And so how do you change and make your campaign a little bit more fluid? And although one last piece on this, like we want to draw a nice diagram to make things seem linear in the customer journey, it's just not anymore. There's a ton of research out there. Many of you have probably experienced this, that there are now 8 to 10 people involved in an IT buying decision. That might differ from industry to industry. I've mostly been in tech, but that means, not only do you have to hit all the marks for the traditional buyer, you have to ensure you're customizing a message and a journey for all the secondary and tertiary buyers and understanding the type of content and information they need to make a decision. So it has become much more complex, but that's why it's so crucial that collaboration exists throughout the funnel, because if you don't have that today, like, everything you're creating in terms of demand at the top is going to kind of fall short.
Well said. I agree with the diagram, especially because it hasn't been linear for a long time.
Right.
So, all right. So we asked you to take a very brief one question poll earlier, and I'd like us to take a look at the results here. So it looks like we had 4 options. The option that came out with the highest rate of 54%. To the question of how do you currently collaborate with your marketing colleagues? We are fully integrated with marketing in terms of strategy. I'm impressed. I was not expecting that. And PR is actually part of the mix. And then we have in second place at 20%. We meet every once in a while to discuss strategies and share insights, and PR is a part of marketing. So Amy, any thoughts there? At 54% of our participants actually have a fully integrated situation in their organization. Were you expecting that?
Yeah, I think that seems about right. I mean, I think, like the scenarios I just spoke to, people are realizing how important those things are when they work together and they work together well. And I do think, like, sometimes the PR team has to kind of scratch and claw to be a part of those decisions and planning, because people think of it as an afterthought. But often they sit in the same organization. It's just sort of, inviting yourself to some of those meetings and sort of making sure that people know that PR shouldn't be an execution point, that they should have say into the process from the very beginning. So yeah, I don't think that number surprises me. I think what surprises me more is probably the second one. We meet every once in a while, 20%. In our organization, we meet weekly in various forms, right? Depending if it's a launch team or something to that effect. But no one wants more meetings. I think if there is an effective way to figure out how to be more collaborative without meeting regularly, that's a great strategy as well. But I do think it's crucial to have these things sort of tied at the hip, that it's never an afterthought.
No, I totally agree with you. And about 25% of our participants are either, and I've combined these two, the PR and marketing teams actually seldom collaborate, or while they sit on different teams, they share social. I've experienced more of we share the social part of marketing and PR, because I've watched this coming together over time. So I was actually more impressed that 54% of our participants actually have a program. So I'm hoping the other percent are actually able to get some more out of this, but frankly, everyone, because there's always something that we can learn from the experiences of others. So let us continue, and thank you very much for taking the poll, folks. All right, so Like I was saying, success is more likely if you're actually joining forces with marketing. As communicators, as marketers, if you're joined forces. So how can PR teams work more collaboratively with marketing teams to develop and execute those strategies and share insights and compare data and actually drive more impact? So we're going to take a look now at a few different areas and opportunities for cross-functional synergies. You love my buzzwords, synergy, but really the synergy of your strategy is what's going to help you succeed. So any strategy should be rooted in clear goals. So make sure both PR and marketing go through that objective setting exercise, because that's actually essential to start off with. Your strategy is the roadmap for achieving those goals and objectives. If communications and marketing objectives are aligned, the strategy to achieve those will most likely be aligned. It'll be interconnected, interdependent as well, especially where there is that overlap of PR and marketing. Messaging is another great collaboration opportunity for PR and marketing. So start by sharing which messages have worked best so far on both ends, and any insights that you actually have separately collected on your audience's needs. Communicators can offer data from media monitoring, social listening, media relations, and campaign measurement, while on the marketing side, marketers can contribute the results of focus groups and customer surveys and promotions and other tactical activity that they may have had. Amy, when you're working with marketing on, how have you actually worked with marketing on strategy and messaging?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like four areas I would say. So one, understand the buyer or the buyers. Like I
Mhm.
mentioned, there's several people and functions in the buying journey now. So it's really up to us to understand how we adapt that message to these buyers or influencers, and make sure the strategy is fluid to integrate new ideas and messages as you learn from the data. I spent time running product marketing in a company and got the chance to do a lot of that buyer user persona work. And it can be pretty interesting to see how diverse pain points are. And you just have to make sure that when you're kind of sitting down and crafting your message or planning your strategy, that you have all of those pieces in mind. What does buyer A think about this versus buyer B, and making sure you're kind of adjusting to all of that in your messaging. And there's also other, audiences we have to take into account. So in the case of Extreme, we're a public company. Investors are important, employees, potential employees, partners. And I always try to sit with the content that we're creating and filter everything through that lens. Like, how would this sit with an investor versus an employee? Number two, plan the journey. Like I mentioned, make sure it's bulletproof. It's great to go out and create awareness, but make sure it's easy for them to get to what they need. So, I overseeing social too, organic social, we are very mindful of what that user experience looks like. We don't want to send people to a gated page right away to fill out a form or do it multiple times. We're very selective on how often we'll do that, because this is step one, and often they're not ready to go there yet, right? They're not ready to fill out a form. So just be mindful of that. Another thing, this is a personal pet peeve, and my team will probably laugh when they hear me say this, but buzzword bingo. Nothing makes me cringe more than seeing messaging that says nothing. Speak real. We are in a time where real talk is appreciated. So if I can't understand what you're saying, you can be certain that a prospect or customer or investor won't. And I've seen this in every company I've been in. It's like you get this, messaging to work with, and it's like, the most flexible, end-to-end, scalable. And listen, sometimes we all have to use those words because there's no other word, but like,
Mhm.
just try to, I think people see through that now. I think our audience is more sophisticated. They kind of see that, and they step away. So make it interesting. I like pragmatism and real talk. And then four, A/B test. We do this a lot on our digital channel. So if we're testing a new tagline, if we're testing some new messaging, we'll create some digital campaigns or maybe even social media campaigns that, help us determine what's resonating and what's driving people to want to do more or learn more about us.
When it comes to buzzword bingo, you should have little cards and fill them out so that you can see who failed during the
Yeah.
meeting.
And we're all guilty of it. I mean, it happens, like, especially if you've been in this world for long enough, it just becomes part of your vernacular, but,
Yes.
try to avoid it as much as possible.
Yes, I agree. So, using your new integrated messaging framework, you can now actually create content that will attract your target customers and speak to their needs at every step of the actual customer journey. Remember, this content must be consistent and continuous, whether the touch point with the audience comes from marketing or it comes from communications efforts. So as such, make it a point to review your editorial calendars together, whether you're meeting on a quarterly or monthly basis, or in Amy's case, on a weekly basis, because we do pivot and things do change. While PR teams can keep a pulse on, what their target publications are covering in terms of developing trends and popular recurring topics, and they can use this information for pitches, content marketing teams can pick up on those themes and actually amplify potential media coverage with blogs and case studies and ebooks, et cetera. On the flip side, repurposing existing marketing content into PR content is a way that you can provide, for example, a new product fact sheet and for a featured article, and you can increase exposure for the brand. And, if you aren't already established as a thought leader, you can start to build that reputation or establish yourself as a thought leader in your industry. So, Amy, I'd like to know what you would actually recommend around joint content development.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of telling a story. I think sometimes marketing teams are programmed to think like turn a campaign on, turn a campaign off, which sometimes depends on whatever the flavor of the week is in terms of the topic. And I really hate that check the box mentality. I think it's critical to invest in telling a story to the market with a beginning, middle, choose your own adventure, and maybe an end. For instance, go into a launch of a product or a solution or something significant and kind of have that charted out. Like, okay, here's what day one looks like when we sort of bring the news to market. How do we continue to tell this story through the voice of the customer, through the voice of a partner? What are the checkpoints we want to have in place? Do we want to create product videos? Like all that should be thought of with the notion of telling a story. And we've all seen the studies says it takes, hearing something 3 times to make it stick. So when we work with the content team, it's around that. How do we make this more dynamic, available, digestible? People have short attention spans. You have to find a way to get the key message to them in a way that packs a punch in a short amount of time. You have to make sure your product story, corporate vision, and customer needs align and that they're backed by research and findings. And most importantly, you have to be able to pivot, right, in the way you do it. So for instance, I think we all went through this during the pandemic. The needs of our customers changed in an instance. For instance, healthcare companies, we work with them. And, while they were worried previously about the 4 walls with what's happening within the 4 walls of their facility, we had an instance where they were setting up vaccine clinics and we had to pivot in the way we were thinking about, helping them and telling a story to them, and that we went out and actually set up Wi-Fi access points in mobile locations so they could run these clinics in mobile locations, not just within the 4 walls of their hospital. When the Super Bowl was happening in February of 2021, there were still many COVID protocols in place. We went in and helped the NFL by making a lot of the transactions touchless within the stadium. So mobile ticketing, mobile concessions, right? And those weren't necessarily things that we were thinking of in the immediate future, but they became immediate realities. So just having that fluidity and how you tell a story to market is critical and within your own messaging and within your storytelling.
I love that those examples of the fluidity of what's happening in real time and how you've had to adjust. It's our world these days, and it's just increased. So we all have to be ready for that. So finally, the effectiveness of PR and marketing actually must be held to specific metrics and outcomes that help you execute your strategy and achieve your objectives. That's how you define success. Learn where to make adjustments, like we were just explaining, and understand how to optimize your campaigns. Your marketing colleagues most likely already have established effectiveness tracking systems and dashboards, as well as ways to assess and pivot when necessary and share results with the C suite. You can actually tap into those assets and that expertise to create a communications measurement framework that aligns with the marketing metrics. Remember, although marketing success is primarily measured by an increase in sales, PR can also contribute to business goals by influencing awareness, improving brand reputation and engagement, and even driving website traffic and desired actions from your audience. So, with advanced technology and metrics offered by solutions such as Onclusive, everyone in your audience can see how communications efforts contribute towards business objectives and impact revenue in a measurable and quantifiable way. Amy, when you've what have you seen work well when it comes to integrating PR and marketing measurements together?
Um, Being able to put tangible, real data in front of executives has changed the game for PR. If you're not having a conversation beyond potential reach or number of hits, or if you're using old school metrics like relative cost of ad space, you'll probably never have a seat at the table as a strategic leader in your organization. Bringing this information in front of people not only gives PR a meaningful role in the life cycle of a customer, but it makes you more well-rounded marketing professional. You'll better understand the value of your work, the impact it has on the organization, the impact it has on revenue. Most of us on this call are probably working for a for-profit organization. Having those real insights into what's moving the needle on your awareness, reputation, interest, and revenue is critical now. It has to be a part of the conversation, and PR has to kind of prove its worth in that way. And then I'd say on the flip side of that, what I've seen work well is being able to use the insights you're getting, from the dashboard, and adapting your strategy is just as important. So I feel like Onclusive in that sense has been the best kept secret in the industry. Anyone that knows me knows I will not shill products. And this one has seriously changed the game. It just gives us insights in a way that no other tool has been able to do that I've used in my time in this profession. And I really do think it will make you more strategic and visible in your organization, much like CMOs had to make that pivot from, creative only to sort of creative and metrics driven. I think that's happening in PR now, and it really does up level the function almost immediately when you start to have that conversation in a different way.
Awesome. All right. So, as Amy has said, top level executives are looking for integrated marketing communications measurement. They want to see how efforts across the peso, the paid, earned, shared, and owned media are impacting the bottom line, and how they're driving business results. So, how can PR teams demonstrate to the CMO and the CEO that PR is actually a business growth driver? We're gonna go have a look now. So, as communications data and technology innovators, Onclusive has developed proprietary PR metrics that work really well within the marketing funnel. Using this data, you can actually measure and optimize content based on quality, resonance, brand impact, and revenue for every article. We call these metrics that matter because they're the types of KPIs that your C-suite actually understand and they expect them. These include metrics such as brand sentiment, power of voice, which is Onclusive's proprietary content quality measurement, social amplification, reader engagement, brand impact, and PR attribution, which includes both website traffic and website actions resulting both directly and indirectly from earned media content. Amy, I know you actually have some great examples of metrics at each stage of the customer funnel and the marketing funnel. So let's take a look at the different success metrics you're using across your team.
Sure. Yeah, so this is one example of some of the data that we can pull on any given month, day, quarter. You can slice and dice it however you want, but this one right here is looking at share of voice versus power of voice. I'll say, dashboards are the new language of marketing currency. They just are. We go into Onclusive, we get a real-time view of performance on the quarter of all the metrics I talked about earlier. And one of them is, I love power of voice. And so, like Roxanne said, it's a proprietary measurement that algorithm that Onclusive uses to tell you things like how important is the publication. So for instance, Wall Street Journal is getting much more reach than a tier 3 vertical. What was the tone of that? Who shared it on social? And sort of wraps that all into one piece. Versus share of voice is just looking at numbers, right? Like you could get 30 pieces of coverage in a tier 3 media publication and say, well, I have a bigger share of voice, but do you really? Power of voice sort of takes into account all the tangible things that shows you just how strong your voice is in the market. And to me, that's critical. Now, sometimes these numbers are close together. There's not a huge discrepancy between them, but sometimes there are, depending on the quarter. You could get, one of our competitors could have a huge share of voice, but it could all be negative coverage, where their power of voice is not that, because it's, weighting sort of the tone of that coverage as well. So I love power of voice for that reason, because it gives us a real indicator of just how strong our voice is in the market, with particular topics.
Awesome. All right, let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, attract.
Yes. So key message, pull through, and optimization is a big one for us too. I think we're all well beyond the days that you can truly plan an annual calendar for PR. We're lucky if we can even plan a quarter out at this point. So between what we're learning on through Inclusive with keyword performance, or social syndication, we have a real gift. We can see, for instance, Wi-Fi 6E is a big topic for us. We know it's driving a significant amount of traffic, both earned and owned, and we know people are craving that type of content. So immediately we go back and we say we should look at our content and PR strategy and figure out how to do more of this, right? Like, we know that this is something that's driving a ton of traffic to our site. Every article that has this particular topic in it is driving people back. Let's do more of it, because we want to own that conversation. We want to own that narrative. On the flip side, we can see maybe that we're performing less than ideal in some keyword areas, where we want to either grow awareness and we can plan a campaign around it because we're seeing that there's not enough there. Or maybe we say, this just isn't interesting to people, so let's spend our time focusing on something else. So it really gives us that gift to be sort of fluid and make better decisions with the data. We don't see these trends change too much from quarter to quarter, just given our business. But when they do, we know we can be nimble, and we know we have the data to back us up now to sort of, talk other people who are passionate about something down from that pedestal. We can also see how things are performing by region. So one approach here in the US may not be as effective in APAC. And that's really crucial for us to understand, so we can adapt our strategy accordingly by market. You can go to the next one. And then tone and sentiment, it's a great way to just look at how the market is perceiving your message. It may, tone may be very different in earnings season versus a customer win versus a partner announcement. So it is really important to be able to dig in and learn from each of these as indicators as what the market thinks about you. We used to do this manually, which can be pretty labor intensive. I'm sure many of you in this call do this manually already. So having it automated saves us a ton of time, and it just gives us the ability to focus on other things. So that's been great for us. And then from a social media and amplification, looks like that one wasn't changed, but this is a look at social media amplification. So we know that, there are spikes here when we make certain announcements. What this also does is, we have a number of tools for social already, but I love looking at social sentiment here. It tells us which stories are getting the most syndication across social. Sometimes we see it align with things that we're sharing on our corporate channels, and sometimes we don't. So, if nothing else, it shows us which articles are becoming the biggest megaphone for us on social, and is an indicator of what people are interested in and interested in sharing. And so as a social team, we look at this data. We regularly look to see if there's anything we can learn to apply to our organic strategy, and we go after it. So if there's a story that talks about our corporate culture or a particular vertical, and we see a huge spike in sharing on social through some of these articles, we'll take that back and start to plan some organic posts around it. So it really does feed into that nicely. And then this is my favorite one. So the PR attribution is really kind of, the way to prove business impact. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, I was working at a company where we had a really cool campaign. We got incredible coverage at like CNN, CNBC. We even got a mention on Trevor Noah's show. And as a PR team, we were pretty damn proud of ourselves for landing such incredible coverage. And I remember sitting in a meeting with the COO at the time, and he didn't really have much marketing experience, but he was a sales and numbers guy. And he looked at me and he said, well, we don't think that coverage has had any impact on sales. And it was a very deflating moment, but probably not a unique moment for me as a PR person. I'm sure we've all been through that. And I remember being like kind of annoyed that, he couldn't celebrate the success of the team, but mostly I was annoyed that I didn't have the answers for him. I didn't really have a solid data backed source to tell him he was wrong. And that's really what's changed with Inclusive. So for me, this is my favorite bit. We can now go into meetings and I can tell you with a high degree of certainty if coverage drove a visitor to our website, if they became a hand raiser, if they converted, and then how much that deal was worth to the company. So we can put a dollar value on how much PR contributed to the pipeline to some degree. And that really has changed everything. It gives us, insights into where we should invest more in stories about our company culture. When we do, is that lighting up our H&R careers page? And again, we've always had a significant amount of executive support and presence for PR at Extreme, but just having those numbers to put in front of people makes it real. And it's not just a feeling, it really is a game changer. And again, it just puts PR on the same level as the rest of the marketing organization, which, has been challenging in some cases.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I love to say. It's not how I feel, it's what the numbers actually say that matters. Because I can feel one thing, but the numbers will tell us they don't lie.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate you sharing your process and those successes with us, Amy, especially as you said, not
Mhm.
being able to say something, but now feeling empowered because you have the data available to you and you can trust that. So finally, before we go into our Q&A, and if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we will get to them in just a moment. I want to just do a little bit of a summary on the key takeaways from our conversation today. So first, open the lines of communication with marketing. During those planning stages of your annual goals, go ahead and open the lines of communication, start that conversation. You want to be reviewing those goals on some type of regular basis, whether it's quarterly, and also be prepared to adjust, especially as events unfold in the year. We saw with COVID, we all had to literally turn 180 degrees in some cases even more, and had to vacillate depending on what was happening at any given time. You want to share those successes and failures to ensure those learnings are shared. Both sides, marketing and comms, both get the benefit of those learnings, because success is great, but I've always found failures teach us more. Long-term wise. You want to collaborate with marketing, because it helps actually improve PR's contribution to the business growth in a language that's actually understood by the business. It's been one of our biggest blockers as communicators, which is kind of like an oxymoron, not being able to communicate. And finally, providing data that's benchmarked establishes that trusted relationship between PR and marketing when you're reporting up to the business. Amy, what are your key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I think, data has to be a part of the PR mix. If you're using an old school way to show your worth, I think you're doing yourself and your organization a disservice. As example by the story I told a few minutes ago with that COO that I had to work with, I think we have a way to prove our worth now. We have a way to really show tangible numbers. Let's use the data. It will change the conversation. It will help you up-level your PR game. Be agile. I know that's probably an overused buzzword that I hate, but it really is. Use the information you're getting to reach across the aisle and make sure that you're working with the content team and demand gen team based on the things that you're learning, and let PR be more of a pusher, but also like a puller, right? Like pull in that information and let it inform your strategy. And then 3, show real numbers. I think this is critical when you are going to ask for more PR spend or investment, or to venture into new territories. You now have real data to kind of help make that decision easy for stakeholders in the company. And I know that's helped me quite a bit as I've gone to the table to ask for more. So yeah, I think those would be my 3 takeaways.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up. If you haven't already put a question in the Q&A, please go ahead and do so. I actually have one because I have always found the greatest challenge to anything new is the change. So Amy, I would love to hear your tips on how a team, or those 25% that we talked about earlier, How can they open up the conversation with marketing if they seem resistant to this collaborative arrangement?
Yeah, I mean, I think, based on the things that I covered, it's like, there's a lot we can learn at that first step to market. And I think thinking through just getting smart on some of the concepts of whether that's, the funnel or conversions or, some of the terminology that they're using and discussing sort of the role that PR can play in that and how we can help them better understand what the appetite is for information, because we are learning it. We are on the front lines. We are getting that feedback. I think that helps really drive more collaboration across the team and ultimately better outcomes for the team if you are kind of in sync as you're in the planning process.
Okay, don't cringe at this next one, because it tends to be one of those things that kind of gets all of us measurement folks a little riled up. Anthony put a question, some comments that I wanted to share. He says, AVR doesn't really measure or evaluate PR value. Amen. We all agree. I would probably be safe to say we all agree on that. But his questions are, how do you evaluate the benefits of reputation and how do you measure goodwill?
Yeah, it's a good question. Reputation, you can test it in a number of ways. I think sometimes like I was saying, the tone of some of these articles, you can see, is it positive, is it negative, is it neutral? You see in you can take indicators like, are people sharing the content on social? What is the response to that? I think, doing, unfortunately, like what may seem old school, but like focus groups to get a real sense of brand perception. I think it just depends on the company. I'm not sure I would say advertising has an edge over PR because I think there's still organic ways you can test messages. We do it all the time on organic social, just to see how people are responding to one image versus another, one message versus another, one video versus another. But I think in terms of, looking at the sentiment over time, there's not one input that can really measure that. I think it's a accumulation of like, all those things I discussed, and then some where other groups might come in and do focus groups or,
Yes.
customer advisory boards or something to that effect.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention customer advisory boards because that's one of the ways we did that at one of the organizations that I worked at,
Yeah.
because reputation is subjective and
Right.
it's fluid.
Right.
Depending on what the winds
Any
are
given day.
bringing, it can change. So, it has to take into consideration a lot of things. And quite frankly, sometimes you just have to ask your customer,
Mhm.
what do you think our reputation is? Because our perception of ourselves is one thing, and those who have to part with their money or their time, which is extremely valuable, are the ones who can really tell us the truth about who we are in
Yep.
their eyes.
Yep.
So there's a question here about, I think it was Marcy asked this question, and I'm going to go ahead and answer it. She says, how is the dollar value determined? To clarify my question, sharing numbers that come from our media coverage is great, but are you still using the traditional 3x or add value number? Now, I'm not going to answer for Amy, but the dollar value is something that through the inclusive product and using the PR attribution, you can actually see what the estimated value, sales value could be based on how you've determined, what the conversion would be. So that's purely something that you would do in-house.
Yeah, I would say that's how we do it. So every company is different. It depends on your
Mhm.
model. Some models give a dollar value per touch. In this case, let's use as an example, the first touch is worth, X% of revenue when you close the deal. So it varies from company to company. We do not use at all the add value metrics. Like I said, that's like 20 years ago, people did that. And it was like, it still blew my mind then. It didn't seem like relevant. So it really is based on the value of that touch once you get somebody into the funnel and you place a value on it. And again, it varies from company to company. But we have visibility into that now. It was my point, right? Like a lot of times the first touch would come when they fill out a form.
Mhm.
Now we know where they came to fill that form. So that gets a value from a PR perspective. And if PR was the first touch, then it gets a certain value.
Yeah, that I still see that metric with a lot of organizations, and one of the things we do, and hopefully this will kind of address Keith's question about, resources on how to do some of these things, is part of it comes down to education. As an organization, when we sell our product to our customer, you actually get a real live human being like myself, who is with you every step of the journey that you're on. Our goal is to help you do, the best practices at that point in time, to introduce you to the metrics that we have available and that we are developing or introducing at that time, so that you can then in turn do that with your primary audience internally, your stakeholders, because that growth still contributes to your reputation internally. So Keith, I hope that answers your question. We have that ongoing education that we do through the platform itself, and there's help documents within the platform. There's support available to you. So we try to approach it from every learning aspect. Some of us are tactile, some of us like to read, some of us, actually need to do it, 2 and 3 times. And, people like myself are there to help you do that and get you through those quarterly business reviews, looking like the star that you are. So there's one last question I'm gonna address, and it's very specifically if PR attribution is exclusively a functionality of Onclusive. That was Maria who was asking us. It is. It's something that we develop. It's a proprietary metric that we have, and we'd be happy to show you around how that's done. It is an algorithm that sits behind a curtain, if you will, but essentially you're able to see from that earned article all the way through to the convert, how that effort was received and the impact that it's had. So with that, we're getting close to the end of our time together. So I'm going to move on and actually say thank you, Amy, very much for your time. It's very valuable. And it's really great to hear your take on how PR can measure up to marketing through your own experience working with your CMO and your marketing colleagues, and the successes that you've had with the positive reception that you quite frankly have had. It's great to hear that you're elevated as a component of the executive viewpoint that's shared every month. So if you come away from today's session with only a few things, know that you can improve your collaboration with marketing with some very easy steps that we outlined here today, and Amy's proof positive that they work. And in doing so, PR can improve how communication drives business awareness and performance. And lastly, speaking the language of the C-suite, it actually provides you with a credible, trusted voice on the same level as your marketing colleagues. So once again, thank you very, very, very much, Amy, for your time today. I want to remind everyone that we appreciate you taking time out of your day and joining us, and that the recording is going to be made available to you tomorrow as a registration of our webinar. And if you'd like to learn more about Onclusive's media monitoring and measurements, our insights and consultancy, and our PR and communications tool, please go ahead and request a demo or email at us at info@onclusive.com. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.